Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Dentists Who Invest official podcast. A very, very, very special episode. Every episode is special, but this one especially so. The chap we're interviewing today, I'm sure you've heard of him, a little known book written a while ago called How to Own the World. A book that has inspired many of us to begin our journey into finance and begin learning. It's a book that's written in such a simple fashion, yet it contains so much complex information. It's an amazing gateway to learning about the world of finance. And it was certainly the gateway book for me that got me into finance. And I'm sat opposite someone just now via Zoom that when I started the podcast, I thought to myself, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could get this guy on someday? Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could get the chap who wrote this book on someday? And now I'm sat here, and today is that day. I'm pinching myself a little bit. Andrew Craig, welcome to the show, Andrew.
Thank you very much. Goodness me, that's a tough act to follow. I hope hey, look, and it's delight. I've obviously become aware of your group in the last few months, and we're delighted to. I mean, I'm in it, and I've observed the fantastic work you're doing. So I'm super honoured to be here. Likewise, and goodness me, you could have had me on 2 years ago, buddy. Don't you worry about
that. No, I'm chuffed, honestly. And believe it or not, the podcast started about 8 months ago. And it kind of went, well, actually, I think the group started about 8 months ago. And then the podcast came, it spawned the podcast. And maybe the podcast has maybe only been around about 6 months. But no, it's an absolute privilege. Andrew, I'm not sure, maybe you get this all the time, but I'm unsure, just how many people you did inspire in that group. And when someone asks me, how do I begin learning and where do I start? I almost always recommend your book because it's written in a way that it presumes no prior knowledge, and it's a plain English guide. And maybe there's been other books that have been released that explain it from the bottom up, but it's the fact that it's a UK based one as well. I don't know if there's many other like that.
Yeah, well, it's one of the. It struck me years ago as a sort of angry young man when basically I was a stockbroker. I was living in New York, and I think I was on holiday in Miami, and this would be November '07. I was on holiday in Miami, and I met this fantastic, really cool Swedish couple, with my then girlfriend in a bar in Miami. And as you do when you're out and you're having drinks, and what do you do? What do you do? All that nonsense, And I suddenly had this sort of out of body experience. I thought this is like the 50th or even 100th person I've spoken to who's kind of my age and stage. He was a really successful photographer, very cool guy, and he was very highly paid. And he said, all I have is cash and property, because I just don't understand shares or bonds or forget about commodities or whatever. And this was obviously, it wasn't quite pre-crypto. It was pre-crypto actually, 07, I guess. But and I just thought, this is insane, because not only are sort of highly paid photographers or people in other industries saying this to me, but people in investment banking are saying this to me, right? Some of my colleagues who are in their late 20s or early 30s have never bought a share, and they go to work every day to work in investment banking, but they actually have never sort of taken a step back and gone, if you're British, what is an ISA, or what big picture, what's the stock market all about? And so I think on a very hungover morning in Miami over brunch, I thought, I'm going to write a book about this. I'm going to start a business that basically tells people about this stuff from a bottom, exactly like you say, from a bottom up nuts and bolts way. And that was kind of the genesis of how it originally started a long time ago.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, I mean, my personal anecdote or story, I had even less than property at one point. I just had cash, and to me it was just about having the biggest number in my bank account that I could, and then I would save up and buy a house. And I never really thought about anything beyond that. And I knew inflation was a thing, but I thought it was nominal. I thought it was 1 or 2%. And I thought, if I just earn enough, if I just brute force my way to earning enough money, I'll be all right. And it really demystified the whole realm of money, of finance, and it revealed to me why it's actually not a very clever way to think to keep all your money in cash. And there's some really powerful lessons in there. The thing about inflation actually being 7%, that's just mind blowing. I mean, 7% of your money. We all know how effective compounding is.
Yeah.
Imagine the opposite of compounding, but happening to your money every single year. That was the nicest way that someone succinctly explained it to me once.
And inflation is also very personal, right? Because it depends on what you're buying. But, you know, whenever somebody tells me inflation is low, I ask them to then explain to me why most stock markets in the world why does everything run from bottom left to top right, right?
Yeah.
Property in London, you know, Leeds, I'm sure is similar, right? But, you know, Singapore, Zurich, Stockholm, New York, Boston, every single major city, or Melbourne, Sydney, they're all basically at all-time highs. And so are stock markets. And obviously Bitcoin, which I know we're going to come on to, is telling us an inflation story. And then, you know, yes, the way that government statistical agencies calculate such things, so the BLS in the States, the Bureau of Labour Statistics, and the ONS in the UK, leaves a lot to be desired. And it sounds a very conspiracy theory-esque to say that inflation is 7%, because actually we all know that, you know, iPhones and computers and T-shirts and, you know, lots of products have got cheaper, but actually the most important products, I would contend, for most people's monthly, what you actually need to live on, so healthcare, insurance, food, all this sort of stuff, you know, and most pertinently property, because that ultimately is the biggest expense for all of us, have only done one thing in the last 20 years. So how can inflation be 1 or 2%? And you know, as you point out, that's obviously a case I make in the book, but it's nuanced.
Well, yeah, you're quite right. If you have any long-term stable asset, if you just zoom out far enough, you'll see just what you were saying there. The price only seems to increase, and yeah, it just it makes you think when you learn that, doesn't it? Really,
very important to understand the difference between nominal and real. So the point being is the difference between if we agree that everything goes from bottom left to top right, if you zoom out long enough, exactly as you've just said, which is correct. I mean, it's insane. I've seen over 1,000 companies in my career, and every single one of them shows a chart which goes bottom left to top right. Now, to be fair, I worked in smaller companies which find it easier to do that than a massive company that might have backwards years. But, you know, how much of that is monetary inflation? So the fact that the money, the currency units, whether they're dollars or pounds or whatever they might be, is depreciating value versus the real growth of, you know, the fact that Apple are selling how many 100 millions of these now, and that's real growth, right? So, but one of the key failures of our education system when it comes to thinking about all things financial is that most people don't stop for a minute to think about the difference between nominal and real growth, and obviously that's a key theme of the book.
Again, not to go off on too much of a tangent about conspiracy theories, but it makes you wonder why it's not taught in schools as well. I wonder why. Such useful information.
Well, it is. I mean, it's a national. I tend to think with such things that it's through incompetence and inertia, rather than, you know, the Rothschild family being puppet masters in the back. And I think that's true of an awful lot of things. Like whenever I see people on Facebook rail against they or them, you know, they want us to it's just nonsense, because they're just, you know, that you can't get a FTSE 100 board to agree on a strategy, right? So how are you going to get the Rothschilds or royal families of Europe, or, you know, these evil bankers in New York? How are they going to coordinate across 20 time zones and thousands and thousands? I mean, we talk about Davos and, you know, the Bilderberg group and all these sorts of people that people think are controlling the world, but actually, I think it's much more it's much more
chaotic.
boring than that. Yeah, it is chaotic, but you know, why is, you know, it's very hard for example, school teachers to impart the sort of knowledge from, I keep pointing up here because 3 versions of my book are up there, and I'll get them out in a moment to show you how rubbish it was when we did the first professional version, the 3rd edition. But you know, it's very hard for school teachers let alone in primary schools, but in secondary schools and even at university. I mean, most of my economics lecturers, in all seriousness, at a good red brick university when I studied economics, they had no nuts and bolts grasp of shares. But seriously, they're teaching you about really esoteric academic stuff, production possibility frontiers and demand curves and supply curves and econometrics and stuff. Very, very few of the faculty at Birmingham University who were teaching economics truly were investing in shares or could tell you anything practical about pensions or ISAs, or as it was back then, PEP, so they used to be called. But so, you know, and that's the insight, I guess, that maybe this angry young man who wanted to quit my job and write this book and set up this website called plainenglishfinance.com, you know, it does what it says on the tin, was that, you know, it's one of those weird blind spots in society where this incredibly important information, which is, if there's there are a couple of things in life that are most likely to be truly life-changing, right? One is health and fitness, you know, like eating well, going to the gym, running, that will be life changing, because your life will be better if you're healthy and fit and you don't get cancer or whatever because you are. And the other one is finance, because it makes everything so much easier. It makes everything else so much easier. And sadly, both of those things are incredibly poorly taught in schools, and I would contend in universities.
I think going through the treadmill of academia does shatter, maybe it maybe demystifies the illusion that everyone is incredibly competent, because at dental school, okay, some of the stuff we were taught is just stuff that they haven't done in actual dentistry since the 80s, and things that have been disproven a long time ago. Yet that is on the syllabus at
It's
some dental
crazy.
schools.
I had this the other day, so I think I'm right. So I'm not sure what the situation is in Britain anymore. You might know better than I, but certainly in the States, I believe it is still possible to become qualified as an MD, as a fully fledged medical doctor in America, without studying nutrition at any point in your, which to me is insane. I mean, nutrition that's the fundamental building blocks of our organism, right? We all know that our cells replace themselves every few months, and if you're eating good stuff, the result will be incredibly different in terms of cancer and dementia and everything. And I'm not talking about crazy fat. I mean, the amount of misinformation about food is just insane. But you can become a qualified doctor in America and help, try and help sick patients without actually thinking about what the patient's putting in their mouth.
I mean, I mean, maybe we're getting into a deeper commentary of just what American views in general there, with regards to diet. It's hard to say, but yeah, that is quite stunning. Even just the basics, you know what I mean? Because how many conditions and diseases have an element or a component of diet in there? Pretty much all of them. But we digress. But that is very interesting. I didn't know that actually.
The thing is, it's an analogy for finance, right? So,
yeah,
I mean,
totally.
It's a spurious thing that we've gone off down a tangent, thanks to me. Sorry about that. But it's the same is true in finance. As I said to you earlier, one of the most eye-opening things for me was working for a major. I started my career with Swiss Bank, SBC, in the late 90s, and looking around at all these incredibly smart, like Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, Yale, my peers, who were all extremely good at a very narrow, if they're a credit derivatives salesperson or trader or an equity trader, or they're a corporate financier working with big companies to try and optimize their balance sheet structure, how much debt should we raise, which currency should we act in, should we acquire this business, you're a big oil company, should we acquire this oil company in Venezuela, blah, blah, all this sort of stuff. But what they actually didn't do at all, maybe because they were working 18 hours a day and all weekend for them, right, which is the sad reality for 25-year-old investment bankers, is they never, you'd have a beer with them, and I did a slightly different role, which happily was slightly less demanding, which we can perhaps come on to, but and I had this enormous interest in reading, which I think is it's the bibliography of my book is the one thing that, if you ask me how was I able to write it, it's all about the 300 plus books that I was lucky enough to have the time to read, and many of my smartest peers and colleagues were absolutely brilliant at their role, but they had no big picture. They never took a step back and thought, okay, what is the stock market? What is the bond market? What am I actually doing? What, down here for a company? And they therefore, and also like so many other people, and this is more obvious in other walks of life, but they sort of don't think about investment until they wake up one day in their 40s and go, I just better figure out my pension. Or an awful lot of them don't, which means you've lost 20 years of compounding, which is tragic. It makes your ability, even as a highly paid investment banker, I mean, and I was going to say this earlier, but we moved on. But the main insight about investment is that investment should, reasonably soon in your life, if you start early enough, start contributing about as much as what you earn in your job contributes to your financial situation. And that is a secret that's understood by every rich person in history, but is not taught. People don't think that. I mean, we all know what a pension is. What is a pension? A pension is to get to a point in your life where you can live on your capital and the income that comes from your capital, rather than on the income that you have to accrue working. And remember, what is a rich person? A rich person is somebody that actually doesn't have to work because they've got money coming in from other assets, or if they're in the old days because they inherited it from mum and dad. But increasingly nowadays we're a much more egalitarian world from your own efforts. But to not teach teenagers and people in their early 20s about that reality, that it's actually eminently possible to achieve that. And you might, You might achieve it by 45, you might achieve it by 55. Most people seek to achieve it by 65 or 60 when they retire. And sadly, very, very few people do, which is another theme I covered in the book. You know, that one of the biggest problems with our pension system is, even with that pension system, most people are confronting an old age lived in real poverty because they're not taking any steps until they're too old. Anyway, I like this free form discussion, but I'll try and be quiet now and let you go back to the structure that you wanted to inject.
No, this is brilliant. I'm more than happy with this. I was just going to add to that by saying that I was one of those people, you know, before I picked up your book not that long ago, and I just thought investing was the world. I just thought it was boring, you know. I didn't really think it mattered to me, and I thought maybe I'd start thinking about it when I was 30 and 40, and I had, you know, a wife and 2.5 kids or 2.2 kids, whatever the national average is, and maybe. Yeah, I'm really glad that I did start learning, because I would have that you haven't missed a boat. You've never missed a boat. It's never too late to start, of course.
Never too late. Yeah.
But the sooner the better, of course, because of the power of compounding. We were talking about your book a minute ago. I just wanted to know a little bit more about your journey to creating the book, and then how life changed for you afterwards, because surely that book, you kind of expected it to blow up as much as it did.
No, well, that's very true. But just to go to a point, just before we come on that,
of course.
So, what comes across as quite a right-wing kind of evil capitalist investment banker point to make, but it comes from what you just said, is the other thing about finance that is really fallacious and really annoys me is this idea that it's for the rich. Like the stock market is something for the rich, you know, investment, whatever, gold, whatever. That's something for rich people, right? And that gets the causality of the relationship between rich people and the stock market the wrong way around. 180 degrees the wrong way around, right? It's not that rich people are interested in the stock market and it's something for rich people. It's that if you become interested in the stock market, you have a much, much higher probability.
Oh, I see. Yeah, chicken and the egg.
And that's true. That's true for 200 years, right? And it's a tragedy that this, you know, there's a very, especially in Britain, which has a very kind of, you know, eat the rich, like, you know, because we come from this sort of aristocratic culture where the rich were horrendously bad actors for hundreds of years. I mean, they just enclosed all the land, and the only place in the world that was worse than Britain in that respect was kind of Russia and France before they started chopping the heads off aristocrats, right? But you know, incredibly unequal society where aristocrats used to live like we see in Downton Abbey, and the rest of the world went yes sir, no sir, and so there's a deeply ingrained sort of cynicism about such things. But the world completely changed, and you know, there's a brilliant book called The Millionaire Next Door, which explains that, you know, a very significant percentage of millionaires in America are people from ordinary backgrounds and normal walks of life who've just learned this stuff young, and because maybe they had a parent that was like, you know, Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad Poor Dad makes a similar point, and it's like, rather than railing against the sort of politics of envy and jealousy, oh, bloody rich people, there, you know, the stock market, that's for them. No. Roll up your sleeves, get to know about equities and finance and compounding and all this stuff that obviously I talk about in the book. And then your probability of it. Now, look, you can't do it in 3 years, but you know, most rich people are also old people, because that's just, Warren Buffett made 94% or even 99%. I can't remember the stat, but it's like 90% of Warren Buffett's wealth was created after his 60th birthday, right? Now, we'd all like to be wealthy young enough so that we can enjoy it, right? But, you know, I'd still contend that, you know, a lot of millennials look at me, I'm 45, right? And I'm an old man, you know, basically, but I don't feel like an old man. And I tell you what, 20 years has gone past incredibly quickly. So, you know, if you sort of think about your future, so one of the other things psychologists say about finance is the problem with saving money today to make sure your future self is wealthy, right, is that your future self to you psychologically is as much a stranger as some random person walking past on the street.
That is so interesting. I've never thought of that. That's really true.
It's not if you say to somebody who's just moved, you know, just left university and they've got their first job and the money is really tight, and you say to them, look, just find 25 quid a month or 100 quid a month or whatever, even if you work in a bar, trust me, just do it. Get it into a stock market, get it into some sorts of investments, get into that habit. And then if you can bump it up to 30 quid a month, then 35, then 50 over the next, you know, and then in your 30s, it becomes 100, 150, whatever. You will wake up as a 45-year-old, or certainly as a 50-year-old, with, you know, many tens of thousands of pounds, if not hundreds of thousands of pounds, if you're very lucky, maybe even 7 figures, certainly by the time you're 55, right? And the reason that people don't do that is because if it's a choice between going to Nando's or, having a nice afternoon in the pub or whatever it is, and sacrificing that £25, why are you going to do that for this stranger that's the 55-year-old you? And it's a well-known psychologists talk about, it's a behavioral bias that we need to bust through. And the way you bust through that is by reading a lot and understanding stuff and thinking, how awesome will it be to have £1 million of liquid capital when I'm 55, even if I have a pretty ordinary job? Because that's the other insight in the book, is that you don't need to be making a massive income. I mean, the example I use, which you'll know, but is worth repeating, is that I use when I'm doing a lot of speaking events is, so imagine a child is born and a wealthy relative can put £5,000 in a junior ISA for that child the day they're born. Maybe the grandparent or Aunt Agatha or whatever, great Aunt Agatha. At 10% per annum, and we're just using 10% because it keeps the maths easy, right? With no further investment, none, never, just £5,000 on day one, the day the child is born. So obviously after a year, you've got £5,500, right? After 2 years, you've got 6150 or whatever it is, 10% on 10%. On their 55th birthday, the day they can first legally retire, that pot, if it compounds 10% for 55 years, will be 945 grand.
Wow.
A £5,000 investment, right? That's the advantage of starting at zero. And this is, why do we have a pensions crisis when that is a reality? Now, of course, we can come on to this. The pushback there is, don't be ridiculous. You can never make 10% per annum. Interest, the cash ISAs are paying me 1 or whatever. But then the American stock market has achieved 9% annualized going back to 1872, right? And so this is the stuff. Why aren't we telling people about the stock market? The stock market is, and again, God, I'm rambling now, and I'll come on to the genesis of the book. But the other problem we have is the press, right? Which is why I talk about ignoring the news. Is the press inherently focuses 99% of its attention on the 1% of bad things that happen. So what that means is the only time the press ever talks about the stock market on the front page of the Daily Mail or the Sun or the Times or the Telegraph is when there is a stock market crash. There is never a headline that says, last month, the FTSE went up 1.7%. Or in the last 10 years, the FTSE's created over £1 trillion of real value. Or the S&P's created, 50 trillion of that, or whatever it is. It's not that much, but 10 trillion, whatever. There is never a headline that says that. There's no mileage for journalists to say, look, slow and steady investment could potentially bang out high single-digit, low double-digit annual returns, which, by the way, will make you a millionaire. There is only ever a headline that says, the FTSE's crashed, the S&P's crashed, Bitcoin's crashed, because that's what sells papers and sells clicks, right? So anyway, I've chucked out quite a lot of stuff there.
Gold dust, all gold dust, all gold dust. That no, I'm glad that you said that, because you're quite right. It's a recurring theme amongst the press that we never really hear the good side of investing. And actually, I must say that was the reason why I didn't get into it as well, because I thought that the stock market, it kind of hovered around the same, and occasionally there was these massive downturns. So I thought, oh, that's not for me. But
somebody asked the other day, because the FTSE today is at roughly the same level it was 10 years ago, and they said, surely that's crap, investment's crap, right? But actually, in real terms, once you account for dividends being reinvested and the equity yield, not the capital return, you would have doubled your money. But
wow, just in the dividends.
Yeah, but no, and I would be surprised if 1% of the population understands what I just said, truly, right? So of course they look at it and go, oh, it's crap. It's, property's better or whatever. But that's why you need to have a much more nuanced understanding of such things. And of course, in the meantime, the S&P has gone from 666, where it bottomed. The number of the beast from the Bible, right? So to speak, like it bottomed at 666 in March 2009, and it's now over 4,000. Like, who's telling that story in the mainstream British press? Not enough people.
Yeah, true. And that was all of that stuff was stuff that you put in the book. Was that was stuff that you realized that was what inspired you, and then your life.
So let me get the three, with apologies for my informal genes here.
Oh, it's fine.
Yeah, I don't think you're just because because you're right. You don't. So that was the first version of the book.
Oh wow, that's a different cover. It looks totally different. It's unrecognizable.
Which we self-published. That was the second version, where we hired somebody who used to be at Penguin to do things like, simple stuff like putting in an alphabetized index in the back, right?
Yes, I now recognize that cover. Yeah, a bit of an upgrade, we can say.
And then the third, and then we, you know, the same publisher as Charles Darwin, Jane Austen, John Grisham, whatever, came along in March 18 and said, look, we've watched the success of these ones. Do you want to do a proper one with a proper publisher? And
Nice.
yeah, and I mean, but I think the point I wanted to make is, so how did it come about? Like all the best things. I mean, we talked about compounding a minute ago. 5 grand becomes 945 grand. But I did a presentation recently for an outfit called Knightsbridge Schools in London for a bunch of secondary school kids, and the presentation was called "The Power of Compounding in Finance and in Life." And then basically made the point, you know, all the like the easiest way to achieve stuff like this. I mean, obviously there's a fair amount of luck, but is step by step, not Hail Marys or hitting a 6 or, you know, throwing a touchdown pass, right? Is little and often and gradual and steady, and just this like 1% a month becomes, you know, a story that is why we're now talking today, right? And so the reason for me saying is that I was an angry young man in November 2007 in Miami, thinking, oh, I've got to write about this. It really annoys me how poor financial literacy is. And then I quit my job. I worked for another, I think, 3 bonuses, basically, without wanting to sound like a terrible investment banker, but until I had enough accrued to support me taking some time out of work, which I then quit that job in June 2010. And I actually went to live with a mate of mine who just moved to Tokyo. He was a lawyer, and he had this massive apartment in Tokyo. I was like, that would be quite fun. So I moved over there, and I started just writing about this stuff, like, and it was really just a series of essays, like what is the stock market, what is compound interest, what is inflation, like all this nuts and bolts stuff that have become really clear to me. People don't know. They just don't, like, you know, you by your own admission, you're a dentist or a very well-educated dude, and you didn't know it, and we know that very few people know it, but including investment bankers, as I said earlier, right? And I just sat there. I actually sat there on my laptop in Tokyo, just with all this stuff pouring out of me, and then I started this website, plainenglishfinance.com, and I put all of the essays up on the website, on my rubbish website that we the first version in 2010, which, I mean, like anything, you know, you look at that and you're like, what was I doing? And my cousin, actually, my lovely cousin Mary, said, well, this is all very interesting, but you do realize you've got like 100,000 words on a website. Nobody wants to read about inflation. Click here. Like, nobody's going to sit there reading, like, and then happily at the same time, my brother's best man is this wonderful guy called Tim Peacock. He's an old family friend, obviously, and he's head of digital at a FTSE 100 company, and he's also the COO, the Chief Operating Officer of Plain English Finance. And he knew how to take all my nonsense and self-publish it on Amazon's platform, right? So we published it as an ebook ourselves in September 12, and then Amazon has this Create Space platform, which is print on demand of a print version, which you just upload it, and as long as it's not defamatory or pornographic or whatever else, they'll print it. And so they printed it in Jan 13, and then, yeah, like you said, I mean, I don't think I had like 50 5-star reviews within, like, I don't know, 2 months, and it was like, wow, we've sold like 220 copies this month, like, you know, and it was just great. And so then the rest, and then again, it's just been an incremental journey, and I would say through luck rather than judgment. You know, it was demand pull through, and people just found it. Everything we've talked about, the ideas in it resonated with people. You know, people found it really interesting and helpful. And what I would say, without wanting to sound, you know, too OTT, is one of the greatest things about this journey, to use a terrible Americanized phrase, but, you know, it is a journey. It has been. It's 10 years now, madly enough. It's gone by in a flash. But one of the greatest things is people who, like, only the other week, somebody got in touch with me and said, I wanted to get in touch with you to let you know that I've been following your output for like many, like 7 or 8 years. And I've just paid off 15% of my mortgage, thanks to the investments that I made and some of the things that you've been recommending. And my wife and I, you know, I'm sorry, it's a bit cheesy. I won't tear up, but I get messages like that all the time, and more and more and more. And it's like, this stuff works. You know, it really, it's like, it's the money secret the rich understand. It's get rich slow, right? And we can obviously come on to Bitcoin and stuff, but this is really simple nuts and bolts, understanding the fundamental financial products that have existed for 2 centuries. You know, they're a great technology that was invented by the British and the Dutch in like the coffee houses of London in the 17th century. shares and bonds. Actually, bonds were invented by the Medicis in Italy, basically, or you could argue the Sumerians going back many thousands more years. But anyway, people need to know about these things. They need to implement basics. They need to not be afraid of it. Then they get comfortable with it, they understand it. They do simple stuff like direct debit, save some money every month, and it pays dividends. So wow, that was okay. So
no, that was like I say, all interesting stuff. And the book, when you started blowing up, that's when you started getting a lot more exposure, and presumably people got in touch with you regarding PR opportunities and things of that nature. How did life shift for you when that happened?
Well, to be honest, it's only just really shifted 10 years into January. And what I mean by that is, so for pretty much, I took a couple of years out of investment banking to write the first edition of the book and to get Plain English Finance up in lights. And then I got offered a job in January 13, working for a Swedish investment bank. And I'd been out for a couple of years, and your risk reward assessment, I was like, the way, I didn't back myself enough to be able to actually make like livable amounts of money back then. Remember, online advertising was much more nascent 10 years ago. I mean, and it was a really good job offer for a great company, and so I took the job offer. So the point of it being is that since then, so from Jan 13 until 2 weeks ago, I've had a full-time job in the city still. Then Jan 15, I left that Swedish investment bank to go to, I was offered a partnership at a biotech specialist investment bank. And I just worked with them for 6.5 years or whatever it is. And I just quit to go full-time Plain English Finance actually 2 weeks ago.
Oh, wow. Congratulations. I didn't know that.
Thank you very much. And so the answer to that is that, yes, there's been a ton of opportunity. There's been loads of interest. I've met loads of journalists. I've done loads of speaking events, loads of these sorts of podcasts, and the book sells really well now. We've also launched our own investment fund, which a lot of your guys know, which again I was approached by 2 professors who'd read the book, basically. I mean, it's a long, lovely story as to how that happened. But it's taken until now, to sort of take the plunge. And the problem with that, with having a full-time job is a really demanding full-time job at an investment bank in biotech, which requires quite a few hours of my week. And so I've never really been able to fully engage with that PR and that press, but it's just got to the point now where we've got 10.5 million quid in the fund, we've got 12,000 email subscribers, and they've got quite a few hundred more every month, without being able to work on the business full time. That's happening, right? And the book's selling whatever it's selling. So I've just taken the decision to go full time and drive the fund forward and drive our community forward and all the stuff that we're trying to do. So hopefully it's going to blow up even more now.
Awesome. Well, it's a parallel with your investing, really, isn't it? It's the seeds you planted 10 years ago, and now they're coming to fruition. So it's another example of what you're talking about, in a way.
But I mean, so I know how many units the book we've sold in total, right? And the word of mouth impact, if 1% of people tell a mate, oh, I read this book and I like it, and then that mate buys the, word of mouth, right? Well, the number of books we've sold today is obviously like 10 times the number of books we'd sold 4 or 5 years ago, right? In the aggregate number of how many thousand books that are out there in the UK. And so that means that by implication, the aggregate power of our word of mouth on sales is 10 times what it was. So, like exactly my example about the 5,000 becoming 945,000, it's the same with my book sales, right? 5,000 becomes 5,500, becomes 7,000, becomes 12,000, and that's the trajectory we're on. And now all I need to deal with is the dozens and dozens and dozens of messages I get every day, which is, to be honest, is quite tricky, or every week at least. Some days I get dozens, but it's another reason I had to leave the job. I was fed up with not being able to reply to people. I just couldn't, leaving people hanging for weeks on end. You've sent you a lovely email saying, my wife and I, really loved your book. We just wanted to ask you about gold or Bitcoin or whatever. And I'm like, I'm so sorry I haven't got back to you in 3.5 weeks, but I just couldn't, now hopefully I can.
I totally empathize with your position through running my page, and I'm just not quite to the same size as yours, but people send me messages, and I do respond to every single one, because I just think it's so nice that someone's taken the time.
Your Facebook page is much bigger than our Facebook page, but the reason for that is because I charge $5 a month for our Facebook page. I will do that because I couldn't because you're 4,000 or 5,000 on you.
Yeah,
we're like 620 or whatever, and I can't I couldn't do that for 4,000 people and run the fund, and you know, I mean, hopefully eventually I will, because I'll be able to hire staff and stuff. But that's why we have to. That's why we take charge. I think a pint, the equivalent of a pint a month, to have, you know, somebody hopefully help you very significantly with your finances and maybe make a 6 or 7 figure difference to your life is quite good value. But I'll
Seems
stop
reasonable. Seems reasonable to me. But no, guys, I do love every single one of you. I really do, and I will get back to you all eventually. I just need some time on occasion. So keep the messages coming. And the number of friends I've made over the last 6 months has been absolutely unparalleled to any other period in my life. So no, I love it really. I'm very much a fan. The interesting thing. Go on, sorry.
So we're to that point. I mean, lockdown has been, you know, I've wanted a live event in London. My plan is to do one live event a year in London and one live event somewhere else, whether that's Belfast or Edinburgh or Leeds or Bristol or whatever, and have our invite our members and you know, have loads of beers and a DJ, and like, exactly to your point, have a face effect. Like, I do a presentation, try not to bore everyone too much, but fire everyone up, get them you know, excited about finance, hear people's stories of successes and challenges, and have one of those, you know, we'll be one of those events where everybody has to wear a name badge because there's like 200 people in a big room in a hotel or whatever. But and then, you know, some decent music and lots of beers, and I've wanted to do that, but I haven't been able to do that because of lockdown. So that's the other thing we're going to be doing in the next few years. And, you know, perhaps we should you know, collaborate.
Absolutely.
I'd love to come to Leeds and talk to your group whenever you like, really.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I will love to take you up on that offer one day, and I absolutely will. And coronavirus, hopefully we're on the back nine now. We're on the back nine with coronavirus. We're coming out the other end. I really hope so. We shall see. That's all pending, of course, but things are looking good at this point. I don't want to speak too soon because there's been times where I spoke too soon before. Now I know better. Andrew, the interesting thing about a book is it's very much a snapshot into someone's psychology and thinking at a precise time, at an era. How has your thinking evolved since then, if in any way?
So that's a very, very good question, and it, you know, one of the headaches the last few years. So when I got the offer from Hodder and Stoughton to do the 3rd edition, I actually write this in the intro here. There was for a while there, well, not least because I had a full-time job, so I was doing it all like very early in the morning on the weekend or whatever, like taking the last edition and top and tailing it and trying to do some new content. And I made the point in here that actually I thought perhaps I wasn't the first author in history to think that producing a 3rd edition of an existing book was actually harder in many ways than just writing a new book with a blank sheet of paper, because it's just such a deep, like, oh, you know, that section in there on, you know, what have I got? I've got to change what I'm saying on property or gold or shares or whatever. And you're right. I mean, finance is a very dynamic thing. And so, for example, in this has about 8,000 words on crypto and Bitcoin, right? Which I didn't have I mean, I thought about putting it in 2015 because I actually had read Dominic Frisby's book on Bitcoin in 14 or 15. So we thought about it, but yeah, there were things that needed to be changed, and treating crypto and talking about Trump, but, you know, Trump was obviously a big thing at the time, whatever else. But that having been said, what I did try to do, and actually the introduction of this book says everything I'm saying right now, because it needed to, but what I did try to do was 90% plus of the information in this book is timeless. Seriously, like, or at least it's 200 years old. Like, what is a share? What are interest rates? What's the relationship between interest rates and the bond market? What is a bond? How do governments raise money? How does that impact you? How does that impact inflation? You know, why do shares, you know, why is our whole modern way of life completely based on the existence of these products? Like, there'd be no toilet roll in boots, there'd be no beautiful buildings, there'd be no cars, there'd be no Teslas, there'd be no iPhones without capital markets, right? And it's one of the biggest failings about it. It is that important to our lives, to healthcare, to education, to travel, to hotels, to, you know, beach bars, you know, all of this stuff, all this pooling capital is and none of that has changed. You know, that is, and I also, a lot of the presentations I've given in recent months, I talk about the most important investment theme in human history, which will remain unchanged forever, in my opinion, is human progress. Moore's law, the fact that processing power per pound, dollar, euro spent doubles every 18 months and has been doing that since the steam age. It's completely nuts. And that exponential development is why this iPhone is more powerful than the computer put man on the moon in 1969, right? And we can run businesses. I can video call my friends in Australia or whatever for free. I mean, if you said to me when I was at university in Birmingham in 1995, not long in the future when you're in your career, you'll be able to like video call with a thing in your hand, your friends in Australia for free. I said, what the hell? What a load of bollocks! There's no way that will ever happen. What do? We all take it completely for granted. So, but the existence of these products and the idea, the march of human progress being the reason why can you make 9, 10, 11% per annum of real return in your life? Because humanity is progressing at 9% per annum. The S&P 500 is telling you that, right? And with lots of volatility along the way, like coronavirus and whatever else. But if you just, as you say, zoom out and see the big picture theme. So yes, it's a book is necessarily a static source of information from a point of time, but most of what's in there, I think, will remain. I mean, I'd like to think that 20 years from now, most of the content will be as relevant, or very nearly as relevant then as it is now. And of course, the other thing I'll say, I mean, a bit of a plug, but I have a free email. People just need to go to plainenglishfinance.com, plainenglishfinance.co.uk, chuck their name and their email address at the bottom of the landing page, and I send stuff out only every 2 to 6 weeks. It's not one of those really annoying daily spams you sign up and then you just have to delete it every day and it really pisses you off. It's like I write something. My next ones are going to be on ESG, environmental, basic green or good corporate investing, crypto, ETFs, and a few others are my next few. Each of them's like anywhere between 2,000 and 6,000 words. Sometimes I go bonkers on a Sunday and write a university dissertation, and people read it. People love long form content. I mean, look at the success of somebody like Tim Ferriss. He's an unashamed to write long, useful pieces rather than all this, here's 200 words email that I find all. Anyway, God, I'm sounding like a curmudgeonly old man now. But anyway, so people who want updated thinking, sign up to the email address, and there are something like 79 of my legacy pieces on the opinion section of our website on gold and whatever, lots of bits and pieces. Anyway, there you go. Yet another very energetic, rambling answer to your question.
Keep them coming. They're great. I remember watching iRobot when I was, I don't know when iRobot, with Will Smith. Have you seen that movie?
2008?
That sounds about right. I remember, I can't have been, maybe I was about 15. And I remember there's a part in it where he talks to his speaker. Okay, he talks to the speaker in the room, or the hi-fi system in the room, and he says, stop playing music. And I remember in the movie they made it they focused on that part because they wanted to illustrate how advanced technology was in this era that he was dwelling in, whatever it was, and there was robots and things. And I remember thinking to myself, whoa, the day I can talk to my hi-fi system, that is the day we officially live in the future, okay? And now we're in 2021, right? We've got Alexa, we've got Google, we've got all of those things, and it just shows you that your frame of reference, when it never really moves beyond a certain point, when you have these seminal formative years, when maybe you're a teenager or maybe you're in your early 20s, and that is forever your your bubble as such. And anything else beyond that is just mind-blowing to you. And I can feel that happening to me. And now we're in this era where we've got iPhones. I mean, if you think about an iPhone, the power that you have in your hand, how many things you can do with it. I remember having a Nokia 3310 when it was black and white, playing Snake on it. Okay, I remember that, yeah. And I remember thinking that was what a phone is. And in my head, that's still what a phone is, okay? And now we've got iPhones, and it's just mesmerizing. And as well as that, what you were saying, Andrew, Moore's Law, another thing about Moore's Law is because it doubles every 18 months, it's compounding as well. So it's 4 times in 36 months. It's in 54 months, it's 8 times, and it continues. And another
8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's geometric, not linear, arithmetic. Yeah. Geometric, not arithmetic, but exponential. That's right. By the way, iRobot was 2004. I just looked it up on my iPhone.
2004. Wow. Okay.
You're right, and I mean, God, that blows my mind. That's slightly worrying, actually.
Me too. That I thought I could have swore it was more recent than that.
You're right, but there's a very well-known So one of the things about studying finance generally is studying psychological biases, which is sort of how our brains work and how that affects your ability to invest. And there are over 100 of them. If you Google cognitive biases, and this is a huge area of economics now, behavioral finance, basically. Why do humans make stupid decisions about all sorts of things? By the way, your camera's got.
Yeah, sorry about that. I just got knocked a little bit. I'm back.
That's all right. And one of them is one called the hedonic treadmill, which is basically that human beings, we're very well adapted to adapting. So we become used to stuff very quickly. So so all the things you just said that were miraculous would have been miraculous to us 15 years ago, or certainly somebody in the 80s. I mean, I went to Epcot Center in Florida in 1980.
Oh, I've been there. My dad said we'll go to Epcot Center instead of Disneyland, and that is, they are not one and the same. Disneyland is a lot more exciting than the Epcot Center.
Cruel. Did he not take you to Disneyland when you got
Very
there?
cruel. I still haven't forgiven him.
Well, we went to both, so small mercies for my dad.
No, it's okay. I'm very grateful for the holiday, Dad. If you're listening, he probably is going to listen to this. No, I'm very grateful that he took me to Florida. It was great.
But anyway, the point is, it's analogous to what you said a minute ago about iRobot. I remember that, there was a sort of space age future in the big dome thing, and it was these people in spacesuits talk with video calls, and the video calls were in these TVs that were like the size of a car. And in the year 2100, we'll be able to do video calls with these, massive cathode ray televisions that weigh half a ton. And within my lifetime, we've got an iPhone. It's just this tiny little thing. It's mind blowing. But the hedonic adjustment is the fact that we become inured to these things very, very quickly, and we take them for granted because that's how humans survived, right? Adaptation, but it's a real shame because it means that people are always more pessimistic and take for granted the amazing fruits of human progress than they should be. And that's another thing that I write about a lot, is actually explicitly trying to take a step back and realize. There's this great quote from a Victorian historian called Thomas Babington Macaulay. He says, by what methodology, or by what reason do we see only progress behind us and expect nothing but deterioration in front of us? And we've got to stop doing it. And it's like, one of the other themes I return to, which again, because this sounds a bit serious, but it's to do with finance, because if you believe this stuff, and there's so much evidence that you should believe it, then what does that mean for financial assets? It means they're going to go from bottom left to top right, and you will make real wealth, right? And the problem is that the hedonic treadmill means we take everything for granted. We're inherently pessimistic. We think that the future's always going to be shit. The catastrophists have been wrong for 500 years. The world's going to end, the world's going to end, global warming, blah, blah. The reality is they've all been wrong for 500 years. And all that's happened is we've become more peaceful, longer lived, more leisured, better traveled. In the 1940s, my grandparents had to fight the Germans and the Japanese. I am now friends with lots of German and Japanese people, and I wouldn't dream of ever going to war with them. That is far more important. These long run themes are far more important for your sort of future health, wealth, and happiness than Brexit or coronavirus or the fact that Trump was, or any of these things that our press spends its life looking at. But it's a very rare person who takes a step back and tries to proactively think like this. And by the way, I would contend it's a far happier and wealthier person who does. And this is why I write so frequently about ignoring the news. But anyway, again, slightly tangential, but I feel this stuff is really important.
You mentioned, I believe it was your book that I read. You were thinking out loud in the book, or you were hypothesizing that someone might conceivably argue with you, that they might say, why would I invest in the stock market? What if there is a world catastrophe? What if there is a nuclear war or any of those things? But the trouble is, if you go through life with that attitude, then you're never going to be able to take advantage of any investing, basically. And you can never take advantage of these wonderful things. And you also said in the book that if there is, God forbid, a nuclear war, anything of this nature, you've got bigger fish to fry. You've got more things to worry about.
And by the way, if you invest in assets and become wealthy, then you're more likely to be able to afford to buy a boat, a ranch in Argentina with 100 head of cattle and some fresh water with a lake full of fish, and bugger off there and hide behind a big electric fence with loads of guns and ammo. Which, I'm not suggesting people do that, but But it's the multimillionaires who've accrued wealth who will actually be able to do that in that horrendous nightmare scenario. But you can't live your life based on a 0.0001% possible outcome, right? And again, that sort of tin hat thinking. Coronavirus has affected less than 1% of the world's population. Sorry, not affected, but actually had it, been really, really consequential. It's not the Spanish influenza, and we're probably on slightly thin ice here. I don't want to belittle the fact that lots of people have suffered and lots of people have died, but ultimately, it's again the media spends. I mean, every single day I go downstairs to have breakfast, and my wife has Good Morning Britain on in the background, and all they're talking about every day is coronavirus this, coronavirus that, coronavirus this. You go out on the street, you're going to walk past 10,000 houses statistically before there's one where somebody died of coronavirus. Like, it's the law of big numbers, right? It's 0.1% of whatever it is. But anyway, the one thing I did want to come back on though is because you're going to be open to criticism of this is, the environment is a concern. We are depleting fish stocks. We are, but my answer to that is there are two answers to that. And again, I think we worry massively overly about this problem. I genuinely believe that. And why do I believe that? Because I've been working in biotech for the last 6.5 years. So I'm at the coalface of sort of human scientific effort, right? And I believe that it's overdone for two reasons. Firstly, the population of mankind is likely to go massively in reverse in the next 20 or 30 years. We're going to probably peak at 9 or 10 billion, and then we're going to go right back the other way. And the reason for that is there's a brilliant futurologist called Kevin Kelly who basically predicted the internet. He founded Wired magazine, and it's really worth. He's a brilliant guy, and it's worth reading his stuff and listening to what he has to say. But basically, the mathematical imperative here is that every single country that democratizes, has education, and becomes wealthy sees its birth rates plummet. Like Germany, Switzerland, Japan, everywhere. The only reason that population of places like Britain and America keep going up is because of immigration. Because in developing world countries, whether it's people coming from Turkey or India or whatever, that this hasn't happened to them. That they're still having lots more children than the replacement rate for children, right? But as every African, all these countries advance and have better education, more female participation in the labor force, what happens is the population rate falls. So that actually, weirdly enough, we're going to have to start thinking about an economic system that can't rely on human population growth for growth. So, which is going to be a pretty interesting challenge to the way our whole economic systems work for the last 200 or 300 years. But I think it's a challenge we can surmount, because all it means is that the per capita wealth of everyone will go up. Because if the wealth is fixed, but a population halves, everybody actually is going to be twice as wealthy. And that's actually what's already happening. I mean, I did a trip around China for 2 weeks in December 19. It is absolutely mind-blowing what's going on out there. Now, again, like so many cultures before them, they've overinvested. They have all these empty cities and, thousands of miles of freeway that aren't used and stuff, which is a bit of a shame. And, fish stocks are being depleted because there are 1.3 billion Chinese people who now can afford to eat fish and all this stuff. But I think that the great sweep of history will be that, which is a very encouraging thing. And again, it goes back to why I think investment is really important, because who is going to solve these intractable problems? It's companies, it's capitalistic companies. Who is going to blanket the Sahara Desert with solar power so that we can then have free electricity pumped into Europe and hopefully the rest of Africa, just from the solar power sitting in the most useless land in the world, in the Sahara and other deserts throughout the world? That is a vision that actually there are companies working on those problems. None of it makes sense. Tidal generation. You could have masses of tidal power generation sitting in the middle of the Pacific, the middle of the Indian Ocean, the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, with a plumb line into the States, into Latin America, into wherever, which gives us all unlimited free electricity. And imagine what we can do with that. We can do desalinization, we can do better healthcare, we can power robots that care for the elderly. So, and I often talk about, we are basically in a race between Mad Max and Star Trek, right?
I like that.
I think based on the evidence of the last 500 years of human progress, that Star Trek's going to win. We're going to be very wealthy, we're going to have unlimited power, we're going to have phenomenal healthcare, we're going to have robots to help us with everything, and not Mad Max, where it's going to be coronavirus, Brexit, Trump, end of the world, run out of fish, all the animals die. And I spend my life proactively looking for evidence that it's going to be Star Trek, not Mad Max. I mean, one of the things that I give, one of my charitable donations I make every month is I fund half a dozen big cats for the World Wildlife Fund, right? For my little nephews. So I used to get them a present. They get a cuddly toy and it's a few quid a month, and you get a little letter from the tiger in wherever. And tiger populations have doubled in the last 10 years since I started doing that. You know, and okay, that's one small example. Wolves have been reintroduced to the American wilderness in places like Wyoming and Idaho for the first time in a century, right? And they're thriving. None of this stuff gets, like, our mainstream press is moaning about coronavirus every single day. And they're not picking up these hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of other little data points. They're actually really encouraging and positive. And I mean, again, I've gone right off on a tangent, a bit of a rant, but I really care about this stuff. And I think this stuff is ultimately, when you come right back down to it, it is this reality that makes investment succeed. Because it's all the companies that are going to solve these problems that are going to make you money. And you need to look through the nonsense and the negativity to this stuff and get on board, basically.
I think the passion is great, Andrew. And I think that it's important because, as you say, it's not something that we hear every day. And we have this overarching, overbearing stream of negative information, which is not representative in any way. Andrew,
it sells and it sells clicks, but it's no good for us psychologically or to help humanity.
Yeah, I must admit, I actually don't really read any newspapers anymore because I think there came a time where I just thought to myself, am I actually gaining anything from reading this? Is this something that I didn't know before? And is this something that's going to help me? And as soon as you start looking at things through that lens, rather than just the drip feed of negative information, which only makes you feel negative as well, it's another interesting way of looking at it. You just have to think to yourself, if you go out with the mindset that you want positivity and you want positive feedback, it's a self-fulfilling thing past a certain point, and that works the same way for negativity too. And I just don't feel like I'm gaining anything by reading that sort of material.
I totally agree. Not least that now you can curate your own news. I mean, I subscribe to a thing called futurecrunch.ch, which basically is a good news website. It goes out in the world looking for good news, positive stories about the developing world, about medicine, about energy, power generation, about the conservation, marine conservation. It goes looking for positive stories. And every year they do 99 good news stories you didn't hear about this year in December, towards the end of the year. And it's magic. None of it makes it into the Sun, the Daily Mail, and so, but the great thing is now we've never been more empowered to curate our own news sources. And, ultimately you make your own reality. And people might say that's really callous because you don't care about people who are suffering. And I would argue the exact reverse. What a more powerful impact can I have that many, many thousands of people have read this book and get in touch with me and say, actually, you've made a real difference to my life and we're wealthier and happier, or to vote for Boris Johnson. I mean, I'm completely disengaged from politics because I think it's availing us nothing. It's an anachronism. I think we could potentially live in nation states in the future without any political. I mean, we're really going off piste here now, but I can make a much bigger difference to the world by that than by voting, and that's my own particular view. But I think the more people take that view, have you heard of a kid called Boyan Slat?
No, I can't say I have.
Right. But you have heard of Greta Thunberg, right?
Yes.
So Greta Thunberg, and I call it a race between Boyan Slat and Greta Thunberg. Greta Thunberg, tons and tons of press, massive global superstar, standing outside a school in Stockholm bemoaning the fact that us horrible capitalists are destroying the world. Boyan Slat, same age, from Amsterdam or somewhere in Holland, has a business called the oceancleanup.org or the oceancleanup.com, has gone out and raised money from venture capitalists to develop a machine that is going to go out into the middle of the Pacific and clean up all the plastic. I think we need more Boyan Slats and fewer Greta Thunbergs, but that's just my view. Rather than just everything's shit. Well, okay, get out and do something about it, And there are lots of people who are, and they get no press. You've never heard of Boyan Slat, you've heard of Greta Thunberg. I reckon the same is true of pretty much everyone watching this show. This podcast.
That concludes the first episode of this 2-part podcast with myself and Andrew Craig. If you enjoyed this episode, please tune in to part 2, where Andrew and I will discuss investing in further detail. Welcome back to the second episode in this 2-part series with myself and Andrew Craig. We pick up where the conversation left off in the previous episode.
Now, I'm slightly concerned we haven't talked about Bitcoin. So, but it's up to you.
Bitcoin is on the agenda. Bitcoin is on the agenda. Absolutely. We had a few things. We've talked about the philosophy a lot, but maybe now the next few things that I had planned was more about the actual nitty gritty and the meat and bones, meat and potatoes of investing, because there is a school of thought. Now, I love your investment theories. I've read your book. I understand completely where you're coming from. It's about balancing capital appreciation with capital preservation. Okay. And that's, you've got your bonds. You've got your bonds for the preservation for when there's a downturn, and your gold. And then you've got your stocks for the appreciation for when the good times are rolling. There is a school of thought. There is a school of thought that says if you're young enough, and if capital appreciation isn't something that you, let's say you want to take your profits within the next 5 years, okay, then you are more at the whims of the stock market, because you'll know more about the stock market than me, but it's been shown over 5 years that you'll always have more money than what you started with after 5 years, right? Okay, so if you're going into the stock market and you've got an over 5 years investment strategy, investment plan for taking your profits, plan for you retire, all of those things, that would it not be more, because stocks have been proven to be the highest returning asset over any period of time, would it not be more sensible to have a 100% stocks portfolio and just take the hits and the ups and downs? What do you think?
I covered exactly this in my second book, Live on Less, Invest the Rest.
Oh, I see. Yeah, so I wanted to ask you about your second book as well. That we will delve into that.
So I guess perhaps I should have, rather than ranting about the environment and Greta Thunberg, I'll have to focus more on this one. When you said what's changed from the first book, well, I mean, so there's a very simple answer to what you just said, and it's a very well-known classic kind of approach to investment, which is a thing called 100 minus your age. And so basically what I've done, this book really, there's a 5 email series in the opinion section of our website. If you search plain English finance 100 minus your age, you'll find the first one of 5. And basically this book is that 5 email series and a whole load of other stuff that's, emerged over the last few years, and really answering, this has got really dull stuff like which stock, how to open an account with a stockbroker, and what is an ISA. And this is much more nuts and bolts, like prescriptive. This actually goes hand in hand with our Facebook community, and you get it for free. You get the digital version if you join. But 100 minus your age treats exactly the point you just made, which is basically if you're 20, so 100 minus your age is an idea that's been around since probably the 1940s, and it's pretty conventional in the States for financial advisors. And they basically say, if you're the younger you are, the more risky your investments could be, the more equities there could be. So the old approach to it, from the 1940s probably till about 10 years ago, was it's basically 100 minus your age is what you own in equities, or put another way, you own your age in bonds. So if you're 50, you'd have 50% equities, 50% cash and bonds, or bonds, whatever. If you're 70, you'd have 30% in equities, 70% in cash and bonds. And if you're 30, it's the other way around, you'd have 70% in the stock market and 30% in bonds. And basically the rule of thumb is that you rebalance that every 5 years. You don't have to mess about every year going, 64, whatever. You just do 50, 45, 40, etc., etc. The problem with that idea in this day and age is that worked far better when bond rates were 6 or 7 or 8 or 10%. So there's a 54-year chart of the US 10-year, which is basically interest rates, the biggest global bond market, which kind of sets global interest rates ish. I'm just trying to find it, but perhaps right. So that's, I don't know, you can see that, but the average.
Yes.
So basically, that's interest rates in the 80s were 15%. I used to make 11% in my post office account when I did my paper round when I was 12, and now they're 0.5%. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and the average is probably about 6%.
Mm-hmm.
So if you had $1 million, if you managed, there are 2 problems with that. Firstly, if you are 50 and you've got 50% equities, 50% bonds and cash, in an era where the 50% that was in bonds was making, 6 or 7 or 8 or even 10%, that's still really contributing to your ability to grow your wealth, right?
Yeah.
Now that it's 0.5% or 1%, it's really not. And so to your point, you probably want to have a much higher allocation to equities, right? Because there's no use in making 0.5% or 1%. It's going to really take you far longer to make sensible amounts of money. You know, going back to my example of 5,000 becomes 945,000 at 10%. It's no good if you're making 1%. The maths don't work anywhere near the same, right? You end up with nothing. I mean, and that's called underperformance risk, which is a very real thing. And that is why no one should ever own a cash ISA, in my opinion. It's just the most disastrously stupid. You're losing real wealth every year. I think it's a scandal that we have financial journalists in this country who actually talk with a straight face about which cash ISA. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, because let's not forget that when you put into a cash ISA, it takes off your total contributions, doesn't it? It's money you could otherwise be using. Your 20 grand, doesn't that come out of your 20 grand?
I think that's right. You can't do more than 20, so that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But you know, if you want to save cash, just save some cash. But you know, whatever, a month's worth or 3 months worth or 6 months, but whatever you feel comfortable with. But don't. But you know, everything over and above that must be invested to beat inflation. There's no point in having it sitting in something that is less than inflation. But anyway, so if the other problem is with this low interest rates is if you retired in 1995 when interest rates was 6% or whatever, 7%, and you'd managed to build a pot of £1 million, you'd be able to take your £1 million and pay yourself 65, 70 grand a year of income off that pot, right? Because interest rates 6.5%, 7%. Now you're lucky if you can pay yourself 10 grand. So you've got £1 million that you've managed to get to by doing all the things we recommend over a lifetime. Fantastic result, except no, because the risk-free income that you can swap £1 million for now is 10 grand a year. I mean, and people are, again, this is a story that people don't understand. That is a disaster. So anyway, the whole focus of this book is explaining, okay, so rather than thinking about bonds and equities, what you need to do is think about aggressive versus defensive. So if you're 50, you'd be 50% aggressive, 50% defensive. And you need to start thinking a little bit more, in a more nuanced and sophisticated way about what defensive could be. The aggressive is very easy, right? Aggressive could just be the S&P 500, you know, the MSCI World, Global World Index, maybe a bit of Bitcoin for some of your aggressive. Biotech, small. I mean, most people, biotech's been going 14% per annum for the last 15 years. Smaller companies have done 15% per annum for 55 years. Right? Nobody knows this stuff. Now, the crucial importance is that they don't do it every year reliably. They have massive volatility. So sometimes these things halve. And what you've got to, it's very important to deal with, to treat volatility as you grow wealth, right? So anyway, the investment fund we've launched is explicitly for the defensive bit. And the idea is that you basically use backward-looking trend following and global multi-asset, so that you're in the S&P, you're in the FTSE, you're in gold, you're in oil, you're in whatever. And then in a scenario like last year, you come out and go into cash, just using a formulaic rules-based backward-looking trend following strategy, so that instead of when the S&P falls 55% like it did in 07, 08, 09, you're out and in cash whilst that happens. Now, you never sell at the top and you never buy at the bottom, because that's just the nature of it. But over evidence going back to 1872, it lifts returns and massively reduces max downside. So that means that we hopefully think we have a defensive product with a max downside of sort of 5% or 10% peak to trough, worst negative year of about 6%. But that can capture 7.5%, 8% over a business cycle, which means that defensive bit of your money can actually get you to these terminal values, you know, and pay you in retirement. So that's a bit of a long-winded answer, but yeah, the way to think about being more into equities is to use this idea of 100 minus your age. And totally agree. If you're 30, there's no reason you shouldn't have 70% of your cash in more aggressive things, in biotech and smaller companies. And all of that stuff is covered in here. And if people want to buy the book or join our group, it's the 5 email series on the website, and it's all that content's free. You know, it's just accessible.
Cool. Yeah, because that was always, I heard of the rule of 100 minus your age and the stocks and bonds things, but now what you're saying is that slightly shifted in its thinking, in its narrative, and it's more, we should be thinking about the idea that proportion should be defensive rather than just aggressive.
Because in this, like in the 1960s or whatever, like if you were a retail investor, you could only buy bonds. You could only buy the Dow Jones or the US 10-year. You couldn't buy crypto and biotech and you know. So now this is again another point I made in the first book is how much better financial services are now. You have so much. I talk about 10 asset classes in my book. That's 8 more than just bonds and equities, right? So it's a way of thinking fundamentally about aggressive versus defensive, which ones to choose, keeping it really simple, big, liquid, simple stuff. And the other thing, just to say quickly, is of course you could perhaps use 120 minus your age instead of 100 minus your age for a couple of other reasons. Life expectancy's gone up a lot, right? So if you're going to 100 minus your age is in an era where average life expectancy is like 83 years old. Well, if you're going to live to 110, that's not much use to you. And similarly, I've joked about this in the presentation the other day. One of my clients from the job that I just quit is 90 years old. Bless him. He's an amazing guy. He made partner at a stockbroking firm in the early 60s, and he's still going, right? And he can drink. I mean, the last time I went for lunch with him, he can drink more wine than it's just absolutely insane.
Top man, that's impressive. I hope I'm like that when I'm 90. What was it, 98?
No, he's 90. He's 90.
Oh, he's 90. He's 90.
Yeah. Although to be fair, he was 88 last time I went for lunch with him, and I just I don't know how you do it, but the point being is that he's still earning money at 88, right? He's still earning a pretty decent crust, so he doesn't need he didn't retire at 65. He's had 20 plus more years of earnings, so obviously that changes the equation. So he could be more risky than 100 minus your age. So he might use 130 minus your age, which is crazy. But these are all, as I say, I cover all that in the second book, and I like to think that it's, again, whilst the last few minutes of this discussion have probably seemed a bit complicated and I'm speaking very fast, actually, if you get down to, what I've tried to do is paint the picture in a really simple first principles way. It's like, okay, so you're 40 years old, what percentage aggressive, what percentage defensive, and what simple things would you think about for each of those? And then kind of go la 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 and ignore all the, the pick and mix stuff of this and that and salespeople calling you. Just go back to the most big, liquid, simple stuff like the S&P 500, or you might buy a biotech. But that basically outlines a sort of top-down way of thinking about it and doing that.
We've mentioned Bitcoin a few times. In your original book, you are, whilst you're not necessarily negative about it, you are on the fence about it, shall we say. And you said that whilst there could be massive upside, it also could be something that goes to zero. And I believe from memory that you said if someone was planning to get involved with the space, to allocate no more than 5% of their total invested capital to the space. Has your opinion shifted since then? Are you still on the fence? Are you even negative or bearish about it?
Yeah, look, I think so. To me, it's quite simple, right? It's a highly volatile, speculative, unregulated asset, right? Which means that I think it's as appropriate for somebody's portfolio overall as a very risky share, right? So I would probably never put more than between 2 and 5% of my money into a very risky share, like a single biotech company or an oil and gas company that's out in Alaska trying to find oil, and it's on the London stock market worth 100 million quid. One day it might be worth 2 billion quid and you make 20x your money. But in the meantime, it might also drill for oil and spend 100 million quid trying to get oil out of the ground and find a donut and have zero and be worth nothing, right? So but the other thing about what I guess, if my thoughts have moved on further, the other thing is, I think it's really, really important that you think big picture about what you're trying to achieve financially, right? And what you need. That I don't actually need Bitcoin. I don't need something that is unregulated, incredibly volatile to achieve my own personal financial goals. And I think most people don't. There are hundreds of thousands of companies. There are ETFs on whole indices. There is gold. There's such a paradise of opportunity to invest in, right? All of which is regulated. There is actually somebody checking that it's real and that lawyers have gone over it and prospectuses have been written and whatever else, rather than some Chinese whale wakes up in the morning or Elon Musk tweets and suddenly the market's fallen 50%. I don't. Bitcoin could go to 1 million per Bitcoin, right? And it really could. It could be, but there's incredible uncertainty over that. And so what really pains me is what I see a lot, which goes back to what we said at the top of the call, is the number of people, especially people of a certain age, let's say under the age of 40 or even under the age of 50, frankly, what I see on social media, who have never thought about an ISA, who don't know what a share is, who've never thought about, don't know what the equity market is, they don't know how to buy the S&P 500, they've never looked at the FTSE, they've never looked at how to invest in gold, they've not really thought about their pension, all this stuff that's been around for 200 years, right? The technology of investment that mankind has been using for 200 years, and they've gone straight past all of that, and they're investing all their money, and in some instances borrowing on credit card to invest all their money in crypto, because of the whole thing about, well, you know, Bitcoin goes to $1 million, you know, and I've seen people online talk about how they're so excited that they're going to be able to turn £500 into enough to pay for the, you know, the retirement of their kids going to private school and retirement and stuff. And it's like, I saw the same thing in 07, 08. I saw the same thing in 99, 2000 with different. 99, 2000 was the dot-com crash. You know, when petfood.com was valued at like, you know, $50 billion or whatever, was losing money on every can of pet food and shit. You know, and what I think Bitcoin is an entirely Bitcoin and crypto, and it's a very interesting space intellectually. Blockchain, what it might do for the world, Ether, you know, for sure. And Bitcoin could go to $1 million. But I think that there's real uncertainty about whether it will or not. And so for me, I don't want to deploy any capital in it because I don't need to. You know, I have very, very clear goals financially about what I need to get to in order to fund me and mine, you know, look after my wife and kids and, you know, whatever else. And I have a real domain knowledge about a whole bunch of investments that I've been working with for 22 years, right? And so why would I risk any of my capital in something which, you know, Elon Musk wakes up and tweets and it falls through his phone? Even the risk reward is not attractive to me, right? Because I don't need to achieve my financial goals and live a great life. I don't need to buy something that might go up 1,000%, but might go to zero. And I don't want to. So, you know, having said that, as I said to you, I've just quit my job, and I have you know, I need a lot of capital. I might not be able to pay myself anything for the next 2-3 years, right? So I'm slightly more risk averse, you know, right now than I might otherwise be. If Plain English Finance succeeds greatly and we end up with 100 million in our fund and, you know, and everything's going really well, at some point I probably will allocate a bit of money to Bitcoin or Ether or whatever, just because it's interesting and it's speculative and maybe it goes up a lot. But there's no way in hell that it would be like 50% or 80% of all of my investments. And it drives me nuts how many people are taking, and I know you don't take that approach, but there are an awful lot of really, really evil people online, you know, preying on people on Facebook, saying, oh, you know, you can't lose, look at it. And they do the most ridiculously. So in the regulated arena, you would go to prison for doing what they do, which is they say, you know, cryptocurrency Y has gone from this to this, which is up 10,000. If you'd done this, you'd be a millionaire. That is totally illegal to do, whether if you're broking biotech or mining or normal equities, and it's not, and it drives me nuts that that's not illegal. These people should go to prison, right? Because it's so irresponsible. And any volatile asset, you know, the other fallacious thing about that is if you say, oh, Bitcoin's gone from $100 to $60,000, right? That does not mean that everybody who owns it has made that return, because a hell of a lot of them bought it for $19,000 in December 2017 when they got super excited and it was on the press every day. And then we're down to $3,000 to the more volatile an asset class is, the more likely it is you'll cock it up. And because human emotion has a really, really strong part to play, right? And you'll go, oh, everybody's buying, everybody's selling. You know, it's just happened again in the last 2 weeks, right? Elon Musk wakes up one morning and tweets whatever. Then the Chinese do whatever. I don't want to own something or expose my capital to something where there's that risk, even if it might end up being worth $1 million. You
know? There's nothing that you said that I would disagree with. Nothing that you said that I would disagree with. I think that's totally reasonable. And with investing, that's the interesting thing about it. There's no one shoe that fits. And that comes into trading as well. There's horses for courses. There's different styles. And people chase the gains, inverted commas. But what works for you might not work for someone else. That's the long and the short of it. Okay? And absolutely
know yourself. Like, there's a great book called I forgot what it's called, but Dr. Van Tharp about trading.
Okay, Van Tharp's Trade Your Way to Financial Freedom. Here we go, over here.
Yeah, and the first chapter, he says, you know, the most important factor in your success is you. Like, you have to know yourself. You have to know your risk tolerances. But if I may, the other point I wanted to make, with apologies for interrupting you though, because I think it's really important, is one of the great life lessons I think we should all learn, and I'm still learning it at 45, is how you deploy your time is super, super important, right? The 80-20 rule, like you get 80% of your results from 20% of your actions. So focus on the 20% of your actions that actually matter, right? Now, one of the other problems to me with crypto is it's incredibly time consuming to do it well and to do it properly. And I don't have the time, right? My time, every hour of my time that I spend working on plain English finance, doing a call like this, writing a piece, a thought piece about ESG, whatever, is to me a far better use of my time than an hour spent looking at screens trying to work out what Bitcoin or Ether might do next week. Truly. And I think that's very, very firmly true for somebody in their 20s who should, frankly, be working to become better at whatever their main job is. And the ROI on that activity will be far higher on a risk-adjusted basis than the ROI on messing about in crypto groups going, what's it doing today? Is it up? Is it down? Hodl, blah, you know, what a waste of time. And now I know you're a lot, the counter argument is if you've got 5% of your net, 5 to 10% of your net worth, you have somebody who's got a good handle on what is Cardano, what is Ether, what are the merits of these respective things, and says, okay, so own 10 of them and then just leave them for 20 years because that could really materially impact your net worth. Yeah, that is probably a sensible thing to do, but I'd rather do that with biotech names. You know, I really would, because they might cure cancer. I mean, I've got a couple of companies I think are literally worth 100 times what they're currently trading at that I'm about to put in my pension, right? And that's because they might cure cancer. I think that to me is a much more compelling investment thesis than a really uncertain new category of asset class that's unregulated and that can get winged around by Chinese people in Guangzhou, you know, because anyway, I'm ranting and I'll shut up and let you say your piece with apologies.
No, it's great. No, I love to hear your opinion on it. And like I say, you haven't said anything that I would necessarily disagree with. When people get into the space, I don't think they realize just how much time it takes to water the garden and plant the plants and maintain your portfolio. And whilst there are a lot of hacks to make yourself more time efficient doing that, there's an absolute ton of those things that I learned through time that made me way more efficient. I would say you still have to keep an eye on it every day. As for actively trading it, for me personally, sometimes I go whole weeks and I don't move anything around. And then sometimes there's volatility, there's a flurry of activity. What I do is I make it a lot more efficient by setting trade alerts on my phone and on TradingView. So I know if it hits certain prices, I don't have to be in front of the computer. But absolutely, that is not for everyone. And if someone is not prepared to do that, then my argument would be that you shouldn't really be buying many of the altcoins, so many of the alternatives to Bitcoin and Ethereum, because really, we talked about pump and dumps and manipulation a second earlier. 99% of those are pumps and dumps. Okay, 99%. And by the way, this is coming from someone who loves crypto, okay? This is coming from someone who loves it, yeah? 99% are pumps and dumps. However, one of the best ways to invest in crypto, although maybe you might not agree with it on an ethical basis, is to be able to suss which of those charts and which of those cryptos are pumps and dumps by assessing the chart. Okay, and once you can do that, you can be on the right side of the smart money rather than the person who's still buying Dogecoin or Shiba Inu at the prices that it currently is. Because come on, if you look at that, that is so clearly a pump and dump. You know what I mean? And there are people who bought that thing when it was really cheap, and they're selling to people like you so that they can make money. So absolutely, anybody who is actively buying Dogecoin or Shiba Inu at these prices, I would encourage you to think twice about that. It is never something that I would buy the way it looks at the minute. We talk about market cycles. Those are towards the end of their market cycle. And as well as that, we mentioned something earlier. Maybe I'm sure you're aware of this. Well, you did mention it actually. It is possible to passively invest in the crypto space, but there's only 2 cryptos that I would do that with. And you might even argue maybe some would argue there's 3, okay? Those cryptos are Bitcoin and Ether and Binance Coin. Because as long as there's Binance, there will probably be Binance Coin. But the third one I've said, maybe not everybody would agree with that. Not even everybody would agree that Ethereum is a good long-term hold, but the majority of the consensus in the space would say that Bitcoin is your only buy and hold, because whilst the space has value, Bitcoin will have value. That's the philosophy that a lot of people hold. But
But I'll make a comment about that. So I was right. I was a stockbroker with Swiss Bank in '99, 2000 when the dot-com boom was going on, right?
mm-hmm.
And Nokia, I believe that Nokia peaked at about 200 billion euros of market cap, and it literally was 80% of the Finnish stock market, right?
Mm-hmm.
And everyone owned a Nokia phone. I mean, you mentioned a Nokia phone. Everyone owned a Nokia phone, right? And everyone thought Nokia is the big dog, big dog, 800-pound gorilla bellwether that has won the mobile phone battle. It's worth 200 billion euros. It's going to be $1 trillion company. So there were all these crazy prices. And the idea that Nokia, as the most powerful, strong mobile phone incumbent globally, would end up, I mean, I don't know what it's worth right now, but maybe
It's
5
gone.
billion.
It's nothing, is it, compared to what
Well,
it was?
it had a mobile infrastructure business, and the last time I looked at it, it was worth about 4 billion euros. So it was just making mobile towers for Apple and Samsung to run there, and look, I've read a lot about Bitcoin. I've read a lot about the fact that the way it works, it's so intractable. The proof of concept, the distribution, all that good stuff is why it is the big bellwether blue chip that could have longevity and stuff. But I heard all the same arguments, Ben, about Nokia, that it was just unimpeachable, never going to Apple come. It's very rarely the first big dog that comes along in a new sector, whether that's mobile phones in 98, 99 or crypto today, that ends up 20 years later being still the one.
Do you want to hear the Spaces argument against that? The Spaces argument would be that Bitcoin and Ethereum are effectively ETFs of the space. Okay, so it's the equivalent of buying maybe the S&P 500 or the FTSE or something like that, because it's an index of all the cryptos. But again, you and I can say whatever. I can say all I like, and you can say all I like. Basically, no one knows. Okay, no one knows. That is the point. Yeah.
And look, I don't know that the biotech companies I mentioned earlier could cure cancer and go up 100x, right? I mean, or 10x or whatever. But I have a much better probability of getting that right as somebody who's just spent 6.5 years working in biotech than I do about getting crypto right now.
Totally.
And I think, but by extension, I think that most people, whether they're 25, 30, 35, 40, whatever, who are gainfully employed in a job that's quite demanding and takes their time, have got a better, if they deploy their hours of time into that job and career progression, the likely ROI for them personally in their life is higher than deploying that time into learning about trying to figure out what Bitcoin and crypto and Ether will do. That's my genuine view for most people. And the other thing is, particularly when I see one of the ladies who works with us at Plainwell Finance, her son's 13, and he asked if he could invest in Bitcoin the other day. He doesn't know what an ISA is. Now that is to me, that is really worrying, right? And that's really prevalent right now, is that kids on TikTok, millennials, people at uni, whatever. Because the other thing is, any speculative, incredibly volatile asset, like if you've only got 5,000 quid of savings, there's no way you should be anywhere near it. Wait until you're 40 and you've got 100,000 or so. I mean, and I know that I know you were an early adopter, and I know that a lot of people, there are lots of people in the crypto space who did get in and have made hundreds of times their money. So they maybe put 5 grand in and now they've got 200 grand or whatever. And that's great. But, that 200 grand, I mean, a mate of mine's worth has over $1 million in BTC and Ether. And, 2 weeks ago, now it's 600 grand. And sort of psychologically, I would hate to have to think, well, I'm down 400 grand in the last 3 weeks. Now, am I going to be down another 400 grand in the month ahead? Or am I going to be back up 400 grand? I don't know. And I don't want my wealth. I don't want to have to sit there on a Sunday morning reading emails and looking at charts going, geez, is it going to do that? Is it going to do this? I've got no interest in that, because I don't need to. I really, really don't need to. Ultimately, what is the point of all this investment stuff, right? as I said right at the beginning of the call, it is to get to a point in your life where you can live on your capital, not on your income. I mean, and if you like to my point about my 90-year-old stockbroker friend, lots of people don't want to do this. People who love their job might want to carry on earning income, but it's certainly to use financial products to help you become wealthy and have an easier life and be able to afford the things you like and look after your kids and depend on whatever else. In that endeavor, there are loads and loads and loads and loads of really good quality regulated assets with which I can achieve that. And whereas I just think crypto is, it could go to zero. I mean, if I know it's distributed and you can't, but if you can't distribute the person, if it is as illegal to go through Heathrow with a USB stick with crypto on it as it is to go through with 3 grams of cocaine in your pocket, that's not going to be very good for the price of Bitcoin, right? Or any other, if an American central banks the world over, this is the 3 countries that have tried to replace the US dollar with gold in the last 20 years. Do you know what they are?
No, I'd love to hear though.
Iraq, Iran, and Libya. Okay, the 3 countries whose political leadership was mad enough to try and take on the American, what's called the Pax Dollar, and basically the American hegemon, the dollar global currency system. Because Americans are disproportionately wealthy because everybody uses the dollar. It enables them to do stuff that nobody else can do and take more than their fair share of the world's economic output, right? What happens to those 3 countries? Because they say, well, screw you, America, we're going to trade our oil in a gold-backed dinar now. How quickly did the tanks roll in, right? Now, Bitcoin...
That's crazy. I didn't know that. I had no idea.
I don't think when most crypto enthusiasts don't, without always being asked about it, right? There are lots of the arguments, there are plenty of counter arguments to what I'm saying. It's really interesting, it's a wonderful technology, like to get rid of an intermediary and have proof embedded into the blockchain, all that good stuff, and it's distributed and stuff. But at the end of the day, if it starts to threaten America's ability to project power globally, now there's I forget the name, there's a really good Bitcoin commentator. It's like a Turkish name. He's a British guy. He's based in America. He's quite prolific. No doubt it'll come. Ron Paul, somebody Paul, or not Ron Paul, but anyway, it might come back to me. Anyway, he made a really good point, which is a counter argument to my argument. So, okay, fine, but Bitcoin could easily be $500,000 before it gets banned. And actually, in the last 2 years, he's been right. It's gone from 3,000 to 60,000. So, my argument that maybe one day America wakes up and makes it illegal to use crypto on pain of 7 years in prison, right? And so did the EU, and so did China, and so did Japan. And then, well, what happens then? That argument has been valid for several years, and in that time, the price has gone from $3,000 to $60,000, and obviously now back down to $37,000 or whatever it is. But that's a very, very dangerous game of Russian roulette to me with my hard-earned capital. Anyway, and the overall conclusion, to go back to your original question, is I would certainly consider it for a small amount of my net worth at some point when my net worth is bigger, and my net worth at the moment, the speculative, aggressive bit of my net worth at the moment is all going to be going into biotech, because I know these companies inside out. I think I have a pretty good handle on that space. I think companies that are going to cure cancer or dementia or have robots replace nurses in elderly patient care, and there's so much incredible stuff happening in biotech. I think that is fundamentally more valuable than an untested, untried, new type of investment that the governments all over the world might make illegal in 3 years' time.
Yeah, I won't disagree with anything that you said. I won't. I think we can both agree, Andrew, that perhaps the number of people who get into crypto don't fully realize what they're getting into. And maybe it would be helpful if they had more of an understanding of what that entails, and also a better understanding of their circumstances, conventional financial instruments, and how that reflects in their investing, not only generally, but also in the crypto space. Does that sound reasonable?
That is absolutely, and there are good guys. I mean, the trouble is, in an unregulated space where anybody can say anything they want, there are lots of bad actors, right? And it's hard to disaggregate the good actors, but that's your battle to fight, and I wish you the very best luck with it. One other thing I wanted to say though, before we move off the topic, because I've ranted about it, and I didn't mean to come across as So, but it is fascinating. And the other thing I was going to say to you is some of the very smartest and most successful people I know, including my best man, who was my best man when my wife and I got married, who has a very, very high profile job, and is a super smart bloke, are huge bulls of crypto. Like, and they think I'm an idiot, and then frankly, they're smart. They are smarter than me. And I mean, it was like, but it comes back to the opportunity cost argument for me personally. It's like, for me personally, I have a very clear plan about what I want to achieve and what I need and what I can use, which vehicles I can use to do that. I don't need crypto, but I just want to say that some of my very smartest friends have really drunk the Kool-Aid and see the vision and think it's going to be totally transformational for the world and all that stuff. So, I'm probably full of nonsense. That's the point.
But that's the part I love about investing, is there is no one shoe that fits. And to pull you back to Van Thorpe's book as well, we were just talking about it. There's a lot of things. If anybody is trading and hasn't read that book, please read that book. I'm going to hold it up to the screen now. For anybody who's listening to the audio version of this, it's called Trade Your Way to Financial Freedom, and it's by a man called Kay Van Thorpe. And I quoted a lot. In my trading. It's not the only trading book I've ever read, but it's definitely probably the best.
It's one of the real. It's like one of the foundational texts of, if you want to spend time on trading, you definitely need to read that.
It's seminal, honestly. And the way the guy makes so many interesting points in it. He makes the point that trading is 100% psychology, okay? Because if you don't have your psychology down, it doesn't matter what system you use, you'll never be able to trade it effectively. And his other point that he makes that really sticks with me is that there is no holy grail in investing. This is the exact quote. There is no holy grail in investing. There is just your holy grail, and you need to find what that is. I love that.
By the way, have you read Way of the Turtle as well?
I haven't, but it's on my to-read list. I recently read, well, not so recently, maybe about 4 or 5 months ago, Psychology of Money.
Oh, yeah, so I was on a call with him 3 Wednesdays.
No way, Morgan Housel.
Yeah, so it was this Irish. I was doing an interview for a big Irish investment thing, and the two guest speakers were me and Morgan Housel, and I was like, bloody hell. he sold, I think that book sold 300,000 copies now. In fact, at 2:00 this afternoon, I've got a call with his publisher.
Exciting. Wow.
Yeah, to talk about my next book. So with the same publishing house. Don't tell my current publisher that.
Yes, I don't think anyone will listen to this podcast, so we should be okay.
I'm allowed to go shopping, but it's an exploratory school. But no, that I have also, that is, you're exactly right. It's that point about how important you are and your ideas about money. But I mean, then again, that is a malleable thing. Like one of the biggest problems is people have all these totally incorrect beliefs about money. The stock market is a casino. Wrong. Cash is king. Wrong. Property can only ever go up, and paying rent is paying somebody else's mortgage. Wrong. Like if you've grown up with all these beliefs that are just totally simplistic, that parents pass on to their kids, and their parents are not financially literate, like they do this, do that, and they're just fundamentally unhelpful, wrong things. Then one of the most important things to do in order to succeed in investment is to change those incorrect things by educating yourself. And I flatter myself to say that hopefully my book does an element of that.
Educate yourself, everyone. The books are out there. The knowledge is out there. If anybody needs some recommendations on books, you know where I am on Facebook. Andrew, we're coming towards the end of this podcast now. I wanted to ask if there will naturally be some people listening to this who have yet to begin their investment journey. Do you have any words of encouragement that you'd like to offer them to begin?
Absolutely. I think the most important thing, so we alluded to earlier, like my idea of ignoring the news, right? Every week, almost without fail, I'll get at least one email from somebody saying, I've read your book. I really loved your book. Thanks so much for it. I've been thinking about investing. My wife and I just wanted to get in touch because we're wondering whether or not now is the right time to start investing because of Brexit, Trump, Syria, Libya, coronavirus, Boris Johnson. There's always a reason to be scared of investment and to not invest. And my answer to them, and I've written this up in some of my opinion pieces, is the right time to invest is always now, okay? And every month for the rest of your life, as long as you've learned enough about how to do that in a sensible way, like what are the main things? And like waiting until some sort of time when, you know, there won't be Brexit, or there won't be coronavirus, or there is never a time like that, because as I said earlier, the press spend 99% of their life, of their time, focusing on the 0.0001% of bad things that are happening in the world, right? So we all have this completely fear-based, incorrect understanding of investment. So anybody starting out their investment journey should sort out an ISA, should pay at least 10% of their whatever they can save, you know, whatever they earn each month, into a sensible mix of investments. And I'd like to think that, you know, that's the theory and that's the practice, right? And just to repeat, I mean, if I may do a bit of a plug.
I actually wanted to ask you about your new book. So I can see you holding up to the screen. And for anybody who's listening, would you be able to tell us the title and a little bit more about it?
Sorry, it's called Live on Less, Invest the Rest. It's actually, we call it a workbook. So I actually had to pay a lawyer a lot of money to sign off on that book before we published it, because it's quite prescriptive, and it talks about our fund, for example. So you've got to be very careful about what you can and can't say with stuff like that if you have an investment fund, and it all has to be disclaimed. And, you know, hopefully, I think anybody who reads it will see that it's quite fair about the merits of our fund. In fact, it's only appropriate for certain amounts of your money and certain people and stuff. But basically, it's that 100 minus your age idea. It's really the nuts and bolts of how to implement a sensible, big picture, long-term approach to investment. It's investing, it's not trading. And I just want to say, you know, our Facebook group is a $5 a month. You can join through our website, and everybody who joins the Facebook group gets that for free in audio and audiobook and ebook versions. And you can join the thing, pay a $5, get it for free, and then leave if you want to, if you don't like it. So, you know, or it's available on Amazon along with the other ones. So, but I found myself to think that if you get through both of the books, you should be like 80 to 90% of the way to being able to confidently, or maybe even more, of being able to like sap an ISA and think about your pension and just get stuff stored in a really prudent, long run, boring tortoise, you know, kind of approach to investment.
Thank you so much, Andrew, and thanks as well for being so generous with your time, because we've been on this call about 2.5 hours. And what I was going to propose that we split this into 2 podcasts, actually, because I think 2 hours is asking quite a lot of anybody to sit through our ramblings. So that might be quite nice. So what I will do, everyone, you'll be listening to the second part of the podcast. This will be the conclusion that you're listening to now, because this will, of course, be the second bit. Andrew has been very generous with his time today. I'm so grateful that he's managed to squeeze us into his day, because I'm sure he's an incredibly busy person, what with your fund, what with replying to people on Facebook, all of those things. So thank you so much, Andrew. If anybody who is listening to this is not on my Facebook group, the Facebook group that spawned this podcast, feel free to search it on Facebook. It's for dentists who are wanting to raise their financial literacy and gain a practical knowledge about how they might invest sensibly, emphasis on sensibly, okay, so that they can build a long-term money pot and retire and live financial freedom and all of those things that we've taught that we're conventionally told that may be out of our reach. They're totally within our reach, and that is possible to do. You just need the right knowledge to do it. The Facebook group's name is Dentists Who Invest Community Group for Dentists Who Enjoy Trading. I look forward to seeing you on there if you found this podcast of interest today. Andrew, thank you so much once again, and thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, really enjoyed it. Speak to you soon.